The Centre of Economic Research in Pakistan, or CERP, with support of the IGC, is conducting a series of projects aimed to understand the impact of women's mobility on their labour market integration.
So the Women's Mobility Project, which is sponsored by the IGC, looks at the impact of transport on labour force participation and mobility. And one of the preliminary findings from the first phase of our project shows that men and women access and experience public spaces very differently. Yet these differences are not accounted for in current transport planning mechanism.
Despite the fact that more women than men use public transport in Pakistan, that is, they are almost 1.5 times more likely than men to ride on public transport, not enough of them access this mode of travel.
In this project, my colleagues at Duke and I are looking at how much safe, acceptable physical mobility around the city is a constraint for women who might like to work but are restricted in their job search because of transport. We see that women respond to transport offers by increasing their application decisions, but men don't have the same response, and we think that's because of safety issues for women on public transport and in the public space, as well as social norms that constrain women from using certain modes of transport, like riding motorbikes independently.
Currently, women's labour force participation in all of Punjab is just 28%, which is why 70% of the male respondents in the survey said they would discourage female family members from taking the public wagon. Nearly a third also found it unsafe for women to walk in their neighbourhood. Hence, getting to work remains a major challenge for most Pakistani women. In fact, when women can't leave their homes, it is difficult to find a job in the first place.
So one of the things that we found is that there are differences not only in the frequency with which men and women travel, but also in the modes that men and women use. So there have been a number of different initiatives by the NGO sector, by the government, aiming to improve women's mobility, but there's been very few evaluations of what has worked and hasn't worked. And with our work recently, the government has started to take more of an interest in the ways in which they can address gender constraints in transport planning.
In my role as the former chairperson of the Punjab Commission on the Status of Women, I have used the research conducted by CERP with support from the International Growth Centre to highlight women's issues and to advocate for better policies and for designing better interventions for women in transport. These can take various forms. That could be segregated spaces, or it could just be about training the drivers and the service providers to make sure that these public buses, etc., are harassment free. They are more suitable to women's needs.
The Government of Punjab, through the Lahore Transport Company, or LTC, has launched multiple women's-only services such as the Pink Bus routes and Women on Wheels. But the social and economic impact of such interventions has not been rigorously evaluated.
Transport constraints restrict women's mobility as well as their autonomy. It impacts women's decisions about education, about their labour force participation, etc., because the choice about where to work will automatically be determined by what is easier to access. Research has shown that women are more likely to take public transportation, about 30% more likely to take public transportation in comparison to men, because men are able to take private means of transport, for instance motorcycles and other private means of transportations.
A third project in this series tries to understand the disconnect between employers and women, given there is both a willingness on part of the firms to hire more women and a desire by women to work upon finding a suitable job. This information, including real-time insights on the behavior of job seekers, was revealed through data on both firms and female subscribers to an employment facilitation service operating in the Lahore metropolitan area called Job Talash. This service was set up by the research team in collaboration with the Punjab Commission on the Status of Women. The high frequency and high quality job seeker and employer data collected through the Job Talash can enable researchers and policymakers alike to further investigate these factors and test out interventions to enable women who want to work to have the opportunity to do so.